China. Primary investigation into the death of a pregnant elephant in Kerala has found that it may have accidentally consumed a cracker-stuffed fruit, the Environment Ministry said on Monday. The ministry also noted that many times locals resort to an illegal act of planting explosive-filled fruits to repel wild boars from entering plantation farms. The 15-year-old elephant consumed a pineapple filled with powerful firecrackers, which exploded in its mouth in the Silent Valley forest. It died in the Velliar River a week later on May 27th. The issue received national attention and was trending on social media for several days. Rather than looking at this issue in isolation, let us understand the larger issue of conflict between animals and humans. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze how the death of a pregnant elephant in Kerala has put the spotlight on human-animal conflict once again. Joining me on the program today are Ashok Pai, former Principal Chief Conservator of Forests, Uttarakhand; Professor C.K. Vashne, environmentalist and former Dean School of Environmental Sciences, JNU; and Achintya Singh, wildlife activist and photographer. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. All right, Professor, let me start the program with you. Let's try and understand the crux of this problem, because it's not new. You know, as the human population increases, as mankind goes into forests, this kind of an issue is only going to increase. So what is the crux of the problem?
I think it is a very serious matter. And for quite some time, we have been witnessing that the human-wildlife conflict is on the rise. But the incident which has taken place in Kerala has brought this again to the fore. And it is not nationally, but even internationally, it is being talked about as to something need to be done in order to really prevent these kind of incidents as far as possible. Before I really allow and say that what kind of measures can be taken, it is all man-made activity which has resulted into this kind of a conflict, because we are gradually progressing for space in the forest areas, and we are nibbling that systematically and continuously. And therefore, the space for the wildlife keeps on decreasing. You see, making roads and having all kinds of urban expansion and expansion for agriculture has not taken into account the normal wandering routes of the wildlife, which are known as wildlife corridors. And as a result, they habitually move on these corridors in order to search for their fodder and for their other regular annual routine activity for water and so on. Because everywhere the fodder is not available all the time in equal quantity. So I think they keep on shifting and collecting their fodder and for water. And that is the reason that these areas get blocked, because we have really either cut a road or something else, or some kind of urban expansion or some kind of industrial expansion. And this results into all kinds of these wildlife conflicts. These conflicts are on air, these conflicts are in water, and these conflicts are in land, which are very prominent. And particularly it is the tiger and the elephant which all the time makes the news. But actually the wildlife-human conflict is very widespread over a very wide range of species and in very wide different circumstances and situations. It costs a lot of human life, as well as loss to the property and loss to the animal. Largely, it is the animal which suffers. And it is unfortunate that we don't have even good data sets available as to how many animals are killed and what kind of other damage is done to these populations. It is only the human loss and the loss to the property which is really calculated and documented and statistically available. So I think our data is very poor, and our information on this is also very lax. It is only the state subject, and therefore it is really many times local issues are never reported even. And that is a very unfortunate part. So unless we have a complete picture in terms of its dimension, and there is also seasonality in it, because it is not that any time this can happen. There is a predictability available. So in spite of having a predictability and a seasonality, which is also there, it is possible for us to take very serious and very effective measures in good time.
Right.
But
okay. All right. So,
unfortunately, we are not very serious about it.
All right. Points taken, Professor. Mr. Pai, let me bring you into the picture now. You know, this issue is only going to get worse as, you know, the forest cover dwindles, you know, as the population increases and the space shrinks. So how do we deal with this situation?
Uh, it's important to remember that nearly 16% of the world population lives in India, and it lives on a landmass which is hardly 2.5% of the world landmass. So there's bound to be tremendous pressure on the land. Given the huge population of India and the socio-economic conditions of the people, there are bound to be issues cropping up. Now, most of the conflicts are happening in the areas where the people are living in the vicinity of the forest. But what is to be remembered is that due to mining, land irrigation projects, dam construction, there have been continuous displacement of communities which were by and large living in harmony with the nature. Now, when the displaced community move to the other areas, with the marginal section of the people, they resort to the livelihood activities which they are known to. With the need of food security and developmental aspiration of the country, the some of the policies and planning has taken place in a way which to an extent ignored these marginal groups. Even today, we have about 20-25% of the people who are poor, and they are dependent on the nature for their livelihood, which is a seasonal nature. They do migrate to the cities for the livelihood. They do other sundry activities to sustain themselves. Now, when you formulate the conservation policies or the plan, if it doesn't account for these marginal groups of people or the communities, then you are bound to have a hostility of these communities with the conservation plan and the policies framed therein. And that's why at times the wildlife conservation has been deemed to be an elitist sort of a idea, and as it did not cater for these marginal groups. And this is a very important thing to remember. Now, think of the situation where you have about 86% of the farmers in India who own land less than an acre, less than a hectare, which could be varying from half an acre to 2 acres sort of a thing. And when they cultivate the crops or try to have some sort of a food security, and their entire effort of growing their food for themselves goes waste due to the wildlife coming in there rightly or wrongly. There would be despots, and they have no other way of getting it resolved. Now, unfortunately, the many ways of conserving the wildlife are not very people friendly, and that leads to the hostility and the conflict situation. And perhaps that is one of the incident of Wayanad exemplifies that one. For example, the damage caused by the wild boar is extensive across the country in the farmer's field. But even after declaring the wild boar as a vermin, the process to get it eliminated or manage its population virtually is so difficult that these people are left to the means which are questioned by all of us as the educated ones, while without appreciating the kind of brunt these people are facing. And
right.
What is important to remember is that is the entire developmental administration has benefited these communities to large extent. There have been exclusionary sort of a policies which kept these people out of those developmental programs. Whether it is mining, most of the people benefited out of mining would be the big companies. Or if there is a railway line passing through, it is not these marginal communities which are living in the fringes of the forest or in the economic thing, they are getting benefit out of it. So there is a need to look at this aspect, or have a policy and plan which is inclusive of the most marginalized groups who are dependent on nature for their sustaining their lives. And if that is the which is a big challenge, no doubt, if that is there, then it becomes a slightly different thing. But there are no one-off sort of a situation or the solution for this kind of a conflict which is going on, because it's a dynamic situation. Right. It varies from one area, one state to the other, and the different conditions prevail upon there, and that holds good. For example, the monkey menace again is another which has been faced by most of the farmers. The monkey, for example, the monkeys menace, when it was there in cities like Delhi, the monkeys were captured and left in the rural areas, and you just pass down the problem from here to the rural areas. What do the poor farmer do? They can't kill the animal. They can't have the means to capture them. So these are the kind of things which we need to keep in mind when we are talking about the conservation. Because ultimately biodiversity and conservation are important for the existence of humankind on this planet. That is also important. Sure. But without human lives being taken into account or considered, you cannot have this agenda moved on. Lastly, just one example I would give. Between 2015 and 2019, about 1,700 people have been killed by the elephants. And during that period, almost 400 elephants also have died or got killed. So this is not a happy situation. These are the things which make us feel that there is something missing in the entire way the conservation strategies or the policies and plans have been charted out, and that needs to be reoriented in a way that the most marginalized groups and the issues concerning those are taken care of, and alternative economic opportunities, if available, or the livelihood opportunities, they are provided to these people so that they are weaned away from the certain activities which would be detrimental to the habitat fragmentation or this thing, which is largely not because of them, because of the mining and other developmental activities happening in the country.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. So it's a bigger problem. It's a larger issue that needs to be looked at holistically, and the marginalized people who live on the periphery also, their lives need to be taken into consideration, is what you're suggesting. So, but let's look at it from another perspective as well, Achintya. As far as the wildlife are concerned, I mean, if you look at some of the methods that are used to try and eliminate these pests, if we can call it that, using crude bombs or crude firecrackers stuffed inside a coconut or a pineapple, that is one way. Another way is, still people use snares to capture some of these animals. Probably this too needs to be looked at, because the methods that are used are quite crude as well.
So, when we look at the life of a local person living at one of these areas, suppose near a national park or in a 1 gram, or he's like a tribal, and India hasn't been very big on village relocation in a lot of states. So a lot of people live in close proximity with animals. In certain areas, there is coexistence, and in certain areas, there is conflict, because people are either venturing into the woods for NTSP resources, or the animal is coming into the farms, and for people, because they are poor and they have no other source of livelihood apart from farming or those forest resources, they don't understand that how the wild animal is important for them. They look at it as a pest. They look at it as a problem. They're like, the tiger is venturing into our field, it's eating our livestock, so they'll poison the livestock and the tiger will die. Leopards will be lynched in fields in mass groups, and they will be beaten with sticks and stones. At most times, the forest department is too outnumbered. There is an entire village with a sentiment to kill an animal, and you're out there trying to pull off a rescue. And in those cases, it doesn't work. And then everyone is going to, harass the failure of the administrator. Now, what really works in such scenarios, as far as I have seen, is sustainable wildlife tourism. In certain areas in central India, or let's give it Rajasthan, these kind of bombs were first used by the Mogia tribes in Rajasthan for hunting wild boars. And the Mogias were active around Ranthambore. But as Ranthambore was developed as a park, and this incredible organization called Tiger Watch worked on doing surveys, worked on doing local awareness with the people, and teaching them how to stay with tigers. Forest Department has a policy where if the tiger ventures out of the forest and it kills your cow, there is a concession amount for the local. Plus, the locals get a different livelihood than farming. They're involved, like somebody gets to stay at a rest house as a waiter, somebody is a chef, somebody in the family is a driver, somebody is in the family is a guide, somebody in the family is working at a souvenir shop, and they are every day in touch with people socially, where they learn the importance of these animals. Traveling to a lot of these parks which had high tourism taught me two things. It taught me that the forest department is extremely active there, even in small time scenarios. Like a tiger got injured by porcupine quills in Ranthambore. A tourist spotted it. It was reported, and a few hours later, the tiger was tranquilized and it was treated. And it's still doing well. The tiger has gone to Mukundra Hill. Also, when you improve the livelihood of these locals, the local people are the main people involved who are going through this conflict. Like today, an elephant has been killed. Tomorrow, it can be a tiger. Pilibhit Tiger Reserve has had I think the maximum number of tiger conflict cases this year. And even when even when the forest department does capture an animal in a scenario of a conflict, they don't know what to do with it. So they send it to the zoo. If it's treated and alive, it stays in a cage. There are not many programs that involve collaring and rehabilitation of these animals. And also the depletion of corridors. The policy makers have taken a very, environmental clearances are being done at a very fast pace, because we have the idea that development is very, very important and it's the need of the hour. But we also need to develop in a manner where we consider wildlife and habitats, because we are not just a country, we are a subcontinent, and somewhere it's cold, we have Himalayas, somewhere we have rainforests, somewhere we have different kind of habitats and different kind of our biodiversity is very, very rich. We are one of the most biodiversity rich countries in the world.
Right.
So
absolutely.
More focus needs to be put on our policies regarding and our management of conflict. Steps are being taken to manage conflict, but at the end of the day, it does involve the locals who are directly in face of the conflict. Even in I'll give you an example. When I have worked on sloth bear human conflict in Kana Pench corridor. So while we worked near the Mukki gate, where people had been mauled by the sloth bear, their sentiments towards the animals were different. They had an idea of what the bear was, what it looked like, what it could do, and that they need to carry a torch. They need to be aware about its presence whenever they're venturing out into the woods. When we went to the more remote places in the corridor, people were not informed. Certain people did not even know, certain tribal kids that just go into the forest did not know what a bear looked like. They were confused between animals like a wild boar and a bear. They did not know what to do in that case. So certain very small, very basic information was given to them. Awareness was created. People were spoken to. Sarpanches were talked to, and it made quite an impact. Like there was about a good 50% decline in conflict after that project in the coming 5 years.
Okay, so we need more projects going forward involving the locals so that they can understand the whole picture, and then we can see a brighter way forward is what the panelists are suggesting. Okay, we spent quite a bit of time in our opening remarks, so I'm going to ask my panelists to be brief so that we can try and get in as many aspects as possible. Let's talk about one aspect, Professor, a controversial one, population management as far as wildlife is concerned. It's done elsewhere in the world. Is that something that we can look at here? How successful can it be, and is it a good way forward?
I think you are right that we have to really deal with this in a more systematic manner and in a very scientific manner. I mean, these episodes are fine that at one place somebody goes there and somebody tries to really teach. But the question is that it is a much wider problem. First, before I really address this, just very one or two remarks that it is a very wide problem. As I told you that this is a seasonal problem and it can be dealt with easily. Now, when Mahua is in flower, people go deep into the forest to collect it. Now, this is a seasonal problem, and it is during this period actually the wildlife conflicts spurts. So I think this is what we have to really control. If you are making inroads in somebody else's territory, it is very clear that somebody is going to really attack you because they are being squeezed progressively, and there is a limit to it. Now, for example, as Edwin said, that we are very rich in biodiversity and we are also very high in population density. Does that not mean that we should have very, very serious scientific ways of managing it rather than just saying that the problem is very difficult because population is high? I think it becomes very incumbent upon us that under these circumstances, it is absolutely essential that we should have a policy for this, and there is no policy for it. Number two, I must say that we are only talking of elephant and wild boar and blue bull and something like that. But I think the problem is far more serious. And I will just give you a very quick dimension. You see, there have been 4,000 air strikes during 4 years in 80 airports in the country, which costs us enormously. And they are very serious because of the bird strike. And this largely happens because around the airports, we do not really dispose the waste food very properly. And that is the reason that they are attracted and they are really cause of this. So I think it is avoidable. But the question is, we have never done this properly. And first of all, this requires data. Another thing that I would like to tell you, that these days, this question of locust is also a question of wildlife and human conflict. And you will find that this has happened only because that the kind of management that we have done and the kind of global warming, it's all man-made. So I think most of these things, if they are sorted out, first of all, we have to find out the causality of that. And once we have found out the causality, then we should also realize it is a local problem because it varies from location to location, from landscape to landscape, from habitat to habitat, and with the animal to animal. So I think these things have to be taken into account, which has not been done. We do not have a proper tabulation as to what needs to be done with respect to which kind. For example, serpents. You find that day in and day out, they are being killed. And there is a big problem. And there are people, which is a SOS company, which is doing a very good job. So if we really advertise that, so why not the conservation policy as well as the forest clearance policy do take this into account?
Okay. So, all right, Mr. Pai, so what is the experience that the Forest Department has had with dealing with people living in the periphery of forests?
It's a dynamic situation. It is not sort of a one-time solution is there for the ills. But the best experiences has been where the Forest Department has worked with the community and involved them in the decision making, whether it is declaration of the national park or the sanctuary. If it has been done in consultation with them and the boundaries have been drawn, keeping in mind the needs and requirements of these people, there have been successes.
Let me go across to Achintya now and discuss an different issue altogether. You know, Achintya, as far as wildlife is concerned, I mean, can we even call it wildlife anymore? Because the kind of wildlife tourism that we've seen, it seems like the animals and humans have become very accustomed to each other.
Of course, we can really call it wildlife because I've been to a lot of places where, you know, the scenario is like, we'll say certain big wild animals do tolerate human presence when they are living in the tourist areas because the vehicles coming in and going give them a frequent habit of looking at tourists, and it does even change their mindset a little bit. Like I've seen, if you visit Corbett and you visit Dikala, so the same elephants which will come at you in a very aggressive manner in the lesser traveled parts of the park, in a place like Dikala, the wild elephant will not be even alarmed at your presence unless you're too close to it. If you keep a fair distance, the elephant knows that, you know, I have seen these people before, and it's a very intelligent animal. It recognizes you. So it has a fair idea that these people mean no harm. So, and plus, you know, this is very benefiting. This sustainable tourism is very benefiting for the local community. The local community switches from agriculture to a new source of livelihood. And and it is coming through the animal, which was earlier a problem. So in that way, we conserve, and he has money in his in his pocket.
Okay. All right. Time now to get closing comments from all my panelists with the best way forward, starting first with you, Professor.
I think the wildlife conflict is going to be resolved only when we are able to really inform the people that now there is a danger. So for that, I think IT is a very important source that we have to really use. So I think new technology is possible. It is possible to help the wildlife because wildlife is a pride of the country. And as well as it is very necessary to save our population. So I think there are a number of ways, innovative ways that are required. And wildlife learns very easily that the human behavior. So every time we have to really generate and devise new methods. I give you one example. In Delhi, there was a problem of monkeys and therefore baboons were called. But then there was a problem that these are being tortured and these are being kept from the wild habitat. And therefore, baboons were really dispensed with. And now what we have, there are 40 people who have learned that how to really create the voice and calls of the baboon. And they are being employed by the MCD and they are all over the place and they are able to scare the monkeys very successfully. And I think these are the ways that we can do. There is one new method that is possible, that to have one capture, one animal and put it a wild collar to it or something like that with a chip. And at the same time, have various places where their movement can be tracked. And once they start coming towards the village or towards raiding the field, I think the information comes in advance and people are there with drums, beats and so on, so that the conflict can be avoided. And the most important part is that we have to prevent our habit of exceeding and breaching the forest. Let us not do that. And also maintain the wildlife corridors with sanctity, rather than just notionally. I tell you that
points noted, Professor. Because of paucity of time, I'm sorry I have to cut you short. Let me go across to the other panelists as well.
Out of which 3/4 have been breached. So that is the reason that these are happening. I will say that it is possible to mutually live comfortably, provided we take proper care, prevent feeding them and bringing them closer to the habitation.
Okay, all right. Mr. Pai.
Business as usual can't go on. You need to reorient your developmental models. You need to have a relook at your conservation strategies. It has to be inclusive, especially of the marginal communities. There are answers available across the world. We can take out those best practices, whether it is question of having elevated routes, whether it is the question of using the anti-fertility drug so that reproductive activity of the animals, the menace can be contained. Whether it is the question of the different crops which are not very favorable to the wildlife grown there, or food security amongst these community and alternative economic opportunity for these people. There are a whole lot of things which can be done, but business as usual cannot go on, and you have to relook at the entire developmental strategy as well as the conservation strategy and your programs.
Sure. All right. And Achintya, close the show for us with your quick concluding remark.
See, I think this is a very, very solvable problem, wildlife conflict in the country. If more research is put into it, if the NGOs and the Wildlife Institute of India and the Forest Department works together, local communities work together, there is more awareness created, there is more scientific research put in, then definitely it is a problem that can be solved easily.
Okay, all right. On that note, then I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that there is no